Welcome, everybody. This is the one I've been really looking forward to. Joel Brondos, in many ways, is the father of classical Lutheran education and bringing back classical education into our contemporary schools. And he is the father of CCLE. He was the one that had the idea for it. He named it. He chartered it. He got us going. And it's just such a thrill to have him here after the 25 years of this organization's existence. And I know it means a lot for him to see how big this movement has become and the extent of what he has brought to us. Be sure to be here tonight for the award ceremony. We'll be giving him the Magister Magnus Award from this organization. So the session is entitled Rise of the Sturmites, Pioneering with a Future. Please welcome Reverend Joel Brondos.
Salve. Good to be with you all. 25 years is hard to believe, right? It's becoming epic. Like, I don't know what volume of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings this would be by now. I had referred to Dr. Vieth at one time as the Silmarillion of the Lord of the Rings classical Lutheran education trilogy. So because I knew it was going to be later in the day, I chose something a little more dynamic, I hope, kind of after a Star Wars theme and the rise of the Sturmites. And I am a little bit intimidated being up here because I know there are so many of you that are here that are much more intelligent and much more learned than I am. That's part of it. I don't usually mind getting up in front of a group of people to preach a sermon or something, but I have a kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And that's being in front of a group of people with a PowerPoint presentation. Some of you might have had the experience of being in front of a group of 7th and 8th graders. You've got everything ready for your PowerPoint presentation to class, and something breaks down. Do you know what 7th and 8th graders can do while you're trying to fix the machine? So that is a little bit of the tension. Plus, what did I just do with my notes? I don't know. I think somebody might have picked them up from the back. But I don't need them because I can speak for 5 days on this topic. First of all, it's a wonderful place to be here, and we've been here at Concordia before, of course. And I want you to turn around and look at the back window. You do that, please. Ooh, that light is right in the right place, isn't it? Immortal, invisible, God only wise, right? And now look up here, and as you may have been told, this at one time was not a Lutheran institution, right? Is it proper to say that it was a convent of some sort? But anyway, that's what that stained glass used to look like on the left. Who is that? It's Mary. And if you look closely either at the picture up there, I'm sorry I couldn't get quite a better one, but what did they have to do when it became Lutheran? If you take a close look at it, everything is the same except for the face. Yes. So that gives all the more meaning to a chapel of Christ triumphant. Yes. And also in the bottom right, it's pretty small there, but I just noticed also that the stained glass before our little display table that my wife and I have out there has the Holy Bible, and it's sitting on top of some other books. You might want to take a look at that. It says, he says, even too small for me to see here, but in Latin, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But underneath the Bible is Cicero and Homer and Goethe and math. I don't know why they just didn't say Euclid or somebody, and Shakespeare. So somebody was thinking in terms of the liberal arts when they had that glass done. All right, so some of the people from some 25 years ago. I'm not even sure exactly where this was taken, and they all look pretty much the same, right? A couple of them I might need some help, but of those 7 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are here. So you see young Steve Keyser there and Jim Tallman. I hope you've had a chance to talk to Jim Tallman. He's done so much for this organization over the years too, and he really helps me. I've forgotten so much, and he has so many great memories as well. Plus the rhetoric ring, some wonderful resources if you're teaching rhetoric. And of course, Dr. Kopf and Miss America Erica, as she became known in Fort Wayne. And Aline I recognize, but the man in the back behind behind Dr. Tallman, does anybody know who that is? Oops, sorry. Too late.
Is it Contra Hoffman?
Was that?
Was it Contra Hoffman?
That could be. Could be. So a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Gaub had the gall to send me this picture of what I used to look like 20 years ago. There's a story that George Bernard Shaw and G.K. Chesterton often debated, I guess, and they were friendly rivals. But one time, as they were meeting, Chesterton took a look at George Bernard Shaw and said, "You know, there must be a famine where you are because you're so skinny." And Shaw retorted, he said, "Well, looking at you, you caused it." And then Shaw, he should have given up when he was ahead, but he said, "If I was that fat, I would hang myself." And Chesterton responded, "If I were to do that, I would use you as the rope." I think we've identified this as Betty Garwood's classroom, so I have a feeling, but does anybody have green chalkboards anymore? We did have them for a while at Zion, but chalkboards and clergy shirts don't get along very well. And if I could tell one quick story too, well, let me see, wait till I get to a picture of our academy. We'll see that. So some of the takeaways I hope that you'll come away with is, you know, if you're doing this, and I think some of you may be just getting started, it's okay. When I went to my first summer teacher training at Logos School out in Moscow, Idaho, they love to quote Chesterton, and this was one of the quotes, that if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. If something is worth doing, it's worth doing badly, to quote Chesterton. You don't wait till something is perfect before you get started, because then you'll never get started, right? And so, believe me, I did things badly for a long time. 25 years ago, I was lecturing people about classical education. It's kind of like when I first started teaching algebra, I was a chapter ahead of the kids, and I could kind of stay ahead a chapter of the kids. And so, as I look back now to think that I was telling anybody what classical education was, it's kind of ludicrous, I suppose. I've learned a lot over the years, and some thoughts have changed and developed and matured. But also, I was going to say I was going to make a confession to you all, and Lord knows there's plenty of clergy around to absolve me, but I think I'll just call it an admission that at the very beginning, and I'll talk about how I got there, but at Zion Lutheran Academy, from the very beginning, we were advertising it as a classical Lutheran school. And I don't even know if I could have defined classical Lutheran education at the time. I know some of my faculty, most of them didn't know what it was, didn't have much of a curriculum. So we started calling our school classical before it probably was. But it was great advertising. And by the way, we tried all kinds of advertising, if you ever want to talk about that. We took out billboards, we did direct mailing, we did radio, we did cable TV, classified ads, and it was interesting that the very best thing is almost always word of mouth. So if you can get that going, we also, most of those things all cost money, but if you can send out press releases, like your students accomplished this, or they're doing this in class, or whatever, that's free advertising. Include a picture with it. And that gets people interested in making contact. I think Paul Nuss is a good person to, you want to give them something that's going to make them take an action, right? What do you call that? It's
called earned media.
Earned media, thank you. So yeah, we can be wise in that regard too. But keep reading. Now, I know as well as anybody, for many years our entire family was under the school roof. We have 4 sons. My wife was teaching. I was headmaster. I don't think I see my son here yet. I was going to ask him what color the cot was in my office. Because if any of my 4 boys got sick, guess what? You're not going home. You're coming to Dad's office and you can stretch out in the cot. I had a little TV in there that could keep them busy. So they had a very interesting life as well. But, and my wife, you really, if you have an opportunity to talk to her, either today or just call her up sometime, from being a teacher who often get up at 5:30 in the morning. I usually stayed in bed at least another half hour after that. And she was on her way by 6:30 at school, running off papers, arranging everything, and then working all day, and then taking 4 boys to different soccer fields for practice, and cooking supper and doing the laundry, and then grading papers and doing lesson plans at night. I don't know how she did it. One of the deals, I retired before she did, and one of the deals was that she would keep teaching, but I would cook and do the dishes. And that's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, and it's been worth it. But that's one thing that helped make me appreciate what she had done all the more. But the reason I bring that up is because, you teachers, you work hard. And who knows what time in the morning you start and what time you get done at night. People don't realize. They might think that you're only at school for 5 or 6 hours, but your schedule's probably twice that long. And when you get home, you probably don't feel like reading philosophy. You don't want to kick your feet up and turn on the HGTV or the Hallmark Channel, right? But if there is any way to be able to do this, and there's so many different media nowadays, to listen to podcasts on the way to work, or to watch a DVD or something every once in a while on TV, it's just really important to keep on growing and learning. And then, and partly it is, as a teacher, you always want to be a student. For me, one of the things that energizes me is that I love learning, and when I find out something, I want to share it. And hopefully that you are reading and finding out similar things as well, and say, oh, I can't wait to share this with my class, or I can't wait to develop and adapt this. However, if I had been really paying attention and doing due diligence, I should have used the 5 canons of rhetoric to prepare this presentation. I read, at the very least, the 3 fundamental modes of persuasion. Those are great ways to teach children composition, but I'm a very poor example. That we should be leading by example, right? So I'm still, I came to these things a little bit late, and thankfully our children are going to get them earlier. As I would always tell my students, my goal is to make them smarter than I am, so that when they come back years later, I want them to teach me something. Come visit me at the nursing home and tell me what you've been learning. Fascinating things. And it is, what a great delight to have children coming back and see how they have succeeded, how they are smarter than we are. And my 4 sons will tell you that they're able to do that pretty well. Okay, and then collaborate, communicate. It's difficult to tell men that. But talk to one another and find ways to do that. It interested me that once I got a cell phone or we had email, I thought, oh, I'm going to do a much better job communicating with my parents now. You know, instead of writing a letter and putting postage on it or having to pay 10 cents a minute for a phone call, it's so much cheaper and so much easier. But sadly, I didn't do it. But it's good for us. Teaching can be a somewhat lonely existence, but you don't have to be alone. You can reach out to other fellow teachers. Hopefully, you've met some new acquaintances and friends here. And I don't know exactly how it is that Willie Nelson put it, but he said, you know, let's just steal each other's stuff and get on with it. So now that I'm retired, I have so many things that I would love to be able to give away and share with people, but I don't know who it is unless you give me a call or something. I heard that there's some special security coming up tomorrow, is it? I think it was one of the previous Milwaukee Synodical Conventions. This picture was taken. I don't know, maybe you can't read my scribbling. That's a Black Lives Matter demonstration that was going on just a few blocks from the Synodical Convention. And there I am, standing right on the side with my perfectly formed syllogism. I was ready to do battle. But, you know, that is kind of an interesting question. With the world being so irrational today, how do you reason with somebody who no longer uses logic or recognizes it? But what you don't see is just to the right of that frame, there's a line of policemen on motorcycles and cars and so forth. And then right behind me is a former member who's now become a friend, who was chief of police near Brookfield in Hotchkins. And all the police that were back there, they were wondering what I was going to do, just standing on the side there. And he just kind of went like this, showed them his badge. But I know that guy in the glasses, he's a fake. I spotted him right away because I asked him, what kind of clergy shirt is that? Is that a friar tuck or an almy? And he had no idea. Okay, I grew up with Dick and Jane. And these next few slides, some of you millennials aren't going to understand. That's okay, you know, get out your Google Lens or whatever. You know, when I was young, I didn't have any of those benefits. I had to go to the public library or get out the Encyclopedia Britannica. But it was a very common reader where it was a sort of a C-stay. It wasn't a phonics-based type of a reader that we had, that my mom introduced us to. But look, Jane, look, see, baby, oh, you know, run, Spot, run. So that was how I guess I started reading. It was kind of the C-say method and not with phonics. And then also, I don't know how I turned out the way that I am. Maybe it somewhat explains it, but to know the difference between Dr. Spock and Mr. Spock. Dr. Spock, sometimes people have pointed out, people have gotten this wrong in the newspaper and stuff. The Star Trek guy is not Dr. Spock, it's Mr. Spock. But Dr. Spock was one of these guys who wanted to ban spanking and, you know, treat children in a whole different way as you were raising them, which most of that my mom bought into, except for the spanking part. However, that being said, as I look back on it now, it's kind of interesting. Again, do any of you recognize the pictures of those books? Childcraft, the set, Junior Classics, and they had a bunch of classical literature in it, right? You know, poetry and epic heroes and all kinds of interesting things. There was, you know, a fair amount of child psychology mixed in with some of the childcraft things too, but there were good things there. And then also, as we traveled from Ohio to Grandpa and Grandma's house in Dallas, Texas, we would have comic books to keep us busy, not iPads. And we had some good stuff. It's Classics Illustrated. Have any of you seen those? I actually had compiled pretty much a complete set. I think I've handed them on to my son, who has our 4 grandchildren now. But if you ever get your hands on a copy of one of those, some of the notes, the book notes to those at the back and at the front, you can get some good things out of that. Also, sometimes if you have children who don't read as well as others in your classroom, there are many different strategies to do, and rather than, in some cases, I'm not suggesting this all the time, but instead of just leaving them out in the cold and I can't read this book and I can't participate in the class, say Romeo and Juliet up there, or Oliver Twist. Let's say we were reading Oliver Twist and they couldn't do the full version, but we could hand them an abridged version. Now, normally speaking, we're not in favor of abridged books, but if somebody's struggling, they can still get the gist of the story and participate in the class, and they don't feel so left out. So that's one other possible use for those. But in a sense, it's not a substitute, but in some cases it might be something to whet a child's appetite. I know it did for me. After I had read some of those Classics Illustrated, and then I saw the real books, I wanted to read them and see what they were like, even though they didn't have any pictures in them. Also, as we traveled around from time to time, I remember a visit. I wish I knew more about the details. We went to Canada and visited a family. I don't know, my parents took us out of school, apparently. And I got to attend a Canadian school with one of our host's children. And that still sticks in my mind. One of the things that the teacher did was insist that children use different vocabulary. And I took a chance at answering a question, and I used the word big. And the teacher said, well, you could come up with a better word than that, couldn't you? And so I thought, I don't know if it was like humongous or gigantic or something, but really teaching them to use a better vocabulary. And once I did come up with that word, she said, see, you children from the States can learn new things. Another story I love is about one of Dr. Nagel's children. They had come back to the States from England, and they were in an American Lutheran school classroom, and the teacher had asked, define the word cliff. And one of Nagel's sons said, I should think it's rather like a precipice. But another aspect of that classroom was that I ended up using, as I taught later, and just for the sake of fun, if you're feeling a little bit adventurous, if you were called upon, you had to stand to answer, and you had to respond in a complete sentence. Now, that's good for any number of reasons. We're teaching them all this grammar and how to use the principal parts of speech and construct a sound sentence. But we need to have them use it as well. So instead of just having one-word answers blurted out, they would stand when called upon, then they would address the teacher by name, and then they would give an answer in a complete sentence. Now, as long as I don't ask any difficult questions, would you mind trying this? So let's say the question is, how many candles do you see up front? How many candles do you see? If nobody raises their hand, I'm going to call on you.
Pastor Brondos, I see 10 candles up front.
Okay, catch that? She happened to go to St. Paul's Lutheran School. I had Chloe, her sister. I don't know, we're going to make Chloe feel guilty for not sitting, because I didn't actually have Julia in class, but she's aware of those things. But we had several routines and things throughout the day when I didn't always make children stand and answer incomplete questions, but there were times. And rather than, sometimes people have this idea that in classical education the teacher just stands up and lectures everybody, and it's boring and they can't sit still that long. Well, if we go through this routine of when I call on you, you stand up, and you had to stand to the left of your desk and not lean on your chair, whatever good posture, I can work a class over pretty well in a half hour's time. They can actually feel physically tired and glad to sit down in a while. So there are things like that that you can do that as part of, I don't know if that's necessarily a classical ideal, but I suspect there are elements there. And if you read one of my favorite summaries of education in general, history of education, is Elwood P. Cubberley's book. So he has both readings in the history of education and then also the history of education. So he tells the history, and then he has a separate volume with specific examples of, the first-hand, first primary source materials to go along with that. And then I say bedtime for bonzos. Myself and my two brothers and a sister, I learned pretty early on summer days like this how to pull the knob up on the oscillating fan so it only blew on me. You guys, don't have that kind of excitement anymore. And then my brothers found out how to push the knob back down so that it went back and forth again. But when bedtime came, he said our Luther's evening prayers and saying, "Now the light has gone away," or "Abide with me," or something. And I'd get tucked in, and then Mom would go off into the living room and start playing the piano. And she might play a few more hymns or something else like da 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 da. And how could we not have peaceful sleep and sweet dreams after getting put to bed that way? So we had, that classical music was a part of our lives, and you can find DVDs or, I guess you would stream on Spotify or something now of Mozart for children, for example. And really, it just incorporated into your lives. And scholastic. So when we were kids at school, we had the scholastic book service. I think it's maybe not as good as it used to be, but I remember one of the books I bought, maybe because I like spies, or, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., all that good spy stuff, when we weren't playing Army. But a book on cryptography, how to write in code and how to break codes. I got into my office, my dad's office, and I saw this book. It had strange letters in it. Happened to be a Greek New Testament. And so I started paging through, the back of the New Testament. I didn't know what it was exactly, but he had a glossary in the back of his. So I did learn how to pronounce the letters, and I think that was the beginning of something for me, as you will see. So that was part of Dad's office. We would go into his desk drawer and get certs as well, breath mints. And he would kind of get upset with us because he finally got one of those IBM Selectric typewriting machines. And we found out as kids, if you hold the button down, it goes just like a machine gun. But we also found that those ink spools were expensive. So I'm telling you some of these things to see how we each have a life history of how things developed and we come to where we are today, bringing unique things with us. So I went to Martin Luther High School just on the west side of Milwaukee. There with Mr. Krubsack. Anybody here from Milwaukee who had Mr. Krubsack? But playing in band, so many wonderful classical pieces that today I just still love hearing them and sing along with them. My senior year, he hired a little chamber ensemble so that I could play Haydn's trumpet concerto. So that was wonderful. I went to Concordia, Ann Arbor, and majored in biblical languages and humanities, which I really enjoyed. It was I think maybe those were some of Ann Arbor's golden years, but that was a great training for what lay ahead. And I have there and required. I had always liked science and math, not very good at it. I think one good thing about seminary, pre-seminary education was. It was liberal arts because it was a broad education. You had to have some algebra. It's not like, I'm going to be a pastor, I'm never going to need any of this algebra stuff. But to learn how to think that way and exercise your mind. But also I had an electronics class, and there were a bunch of other pre-sem guys there who were on the GI Bill, an electronic class. And these guys had been on like nuclear submarines and stuff. And I really didn't have a clue. I was still figuring out Ohm's law. Towards the end of the semester, the professor called me in and said, Brondos, I probably should be giving you, maybe a D, maybe a C minus for this class, but I think that might affect your grants, and I know you're headed to the seminary, so if you promise never to do anything with electricity again, I'll change it to a B. So that's kind of why I'm here today as well. So I went to Concordia Seminary St. Louis, got my MDiv, but also my STM under the auspices of Dr. Nagel, and I did research on Luther's departure from Augustine following ex opere operanto, that starting out with the Heidelberg Disputation, Luther was trying as a member of his Augustinian order to bring together Neoplatonism, Augustinian Neoplatonism, and Aristotelian scholasticism. So if you know anything about the Heidelberg Disputation, there are two sets of premises. And I think at that point Luther realized you can't do it. And as time went on, I think as part of what is the genius of Lutheranism, if you understand me correctly, that Luther was able to steer through the Scylla and Charybdis of Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism. And that's not to say that he didn't know these things and use them. He certainly did. But he wasn't quite as enamored of them. It would be improper to say quite as enamored of them as maybe Erasmus was. Would you invite Erasmus to be a teacher in your school? I mean, he was pretty classical. And then after St. Paul's College and high school in Concordia, Missouri, I was the dean of chapel, college instructor of religion, and boys' dormitory supervisor. So my wife and I had 30-some high school boys before we ever had children. It was good education for us and for them too. She taught them, don't put reds in with your whites in the laundry, and don't put so many jeans in the dryer at the same time. But then comes, after 4 years, that's St. John's Vincennes, one of the smallest Lutheran schools in the district. And while I was there, a couple of us said, hey, we want to have some more educating stuff for ourselves, but also for our members. And we started something called the Gemeinde Seminars. And the first two speakers were Richard Iyer, who was a chaplain, a hospital chaplain up here in Milwaukee, and G.E.V. And he came and talked to us about classical Lutheran education. And that's one of the things became familiar with his articles, Renaissance, not Reform, and the Pi Day, what was it? I know this, because I just looked at it. What was the second one that you had at that same time? You don't know either? Okay, I don't feel so bad. I can look it up pretty quickly because I have it in many places. So that's kind of really what started kicking things off. And then before all of this social media, there was such a time, we had something called Cat 41. You remember that? Anybody else remember Cat 41? We had Genie and Cat 41. We would use that to have our email groups, and as part of that, we had sort of subgroups. So I remember I was in a group with Matthew Harrison, John Pless, and Paul McCain. How I ever got in there, I'm not quite sure. But at one point, this is my recollection anyway, I had emailed Pastor Harrison and said, why in the world did you ever call me as a headmaster? I still don't know. But one of them had suggested, Matt was looking for a new principal because Mr. Meinson, who had been there for 40 years, was retiring, and I believe it was Paul McCain. He said, well, why don't you ask Brondos to do it? And I guess Harrison thought that was a good idea. And for me, I was aware of classical education. I wanted to do it. The teachers at our little school there in Vincennes, they weren't so sure they wanted to change anything. So I said that I would come to Zion Lutheran Academy in Fort Wayne if they would let me develop classical education. And maybe it's kind of like things are today. They would say, yeah, okay, whatever, just as long as we can get ourselves a principal. We want to fill that position. So then things started growing at Zion Lutheran Academy. And this is a picture of the group of our children that we served. Inner city, I mean, maybe not like inner city Chicago or New York, but lower socioeconomic backgrounds and very diverse, very dear children. I found sometimes the children from families who don't have as much, and the families themselves are much more appreciative than if you're doing classical education in a community where all the parents are millionaires. But also, haven't you really enjoyed, isn't the singing at this conference been great? Or if you go to one of the symposia, isn't that wonderful? But it's still a little bit short for me when on Friday afternoon, maybe someday we'll talk about how I did chapel daily at Zion, but we didn't have morning chapel on Friday. We had compline at the end of the day. And no hymns, no sermon, not a lot of extra collects at the end. It took maybe 10 minutes, and all the children would bring their book bags and things to church, and we would sing compline together a cappella. A cappella. And I know there were people who used to tell me that you can't get those children to sing compline. They can't do that a cappella. It was just, to this day, it still chokes me up a little bit to listen to that. But what a wonderful thing that, you know, sometimes things are a little bit rough during the school week, and to end it with compline. And, you know, go your way in peace. Go home and have a nice weekend. What a wonderful thing to do. And yet, I learned about things like blunts and I'm trying to think what other inner city things. I also confronted for the first time how Lutherans could be so racist. So, for example, one older fellow who had been, I think, an executive for the Western District, back when they didn't have geographical districts, he said, what do you want to teach black kids Latin for? You know, I went, what? So it was a very eye-opening experience for me. After teaching there for a while, my wife and I went up to visit her brother in Traverse City, Michigan, and we went to a mall, and I caught myself looking around and saying, man, there's a lot of white people around here. And when I went up there, I had to work with some rather questionable characters. So that's what we looked like when we were young. And I accepted that call. I took a 15% cut in salary to go there. I wanted to do this. I wanted this to have my sons have a classical Lutheran education. And I figured probably, 1 or 2 years I would have the classical curriculum complete so that they would, by the time they got to 8th grade, have a complete classical Lutheran education. I still don't have it finished, and I've got 4 grandchildren. But I found, there's so many wonderful little things in the classics, and so I just thought I'd maybe share this one. You who are called fathers should be interested in all that concerns the education of your sons. We hear by certain whisperings that the teachers of eloquence in Rome are not receiving their proper reward, and that the sums appointed to be paid to the masters of schools are lessened by the haggling of some persons. Grammar is the noble foundation of all literature, the glorious mother of eloquence. As a virtuous man is offended by any act of vice, as a musician is pained by a discordant note, so does the grammarian in a moment perceive a false concord. To prevent his being dependent in any way on the caprice of his employer, let him receive half his salary at the end of half a year, and his anoni at the customary times. If the person whose business it is to pay him neglects this order, he shall be charged interest on the arrears. The grammarian is a man to whom every hour unemployed is misery, and it is a shame that such a man should have to wait the caprice of a public functionary before he gets his pay. We provide for the salaries of the play actors who minister only to the amusement of the public, and how much more for these men, the molders of the style and character of our youth. Therefore, let them henceforward not have to try the philosophical problem of thinking about two things at once, namely, how they're going to pay for their meals, but with their minds at ease about their subsistence, devote themselves with all their vigor to the teaching of the liberal arts. I wanted to share with you this a little bit out of sequence, and again, I'm not following the canons of rhetoric. This is almost more free association at this point. But you may recall at the past convention, there was an overture passed that the CTCR should come up with a document on the philosophy of Lutheran education. Does anybody remember that? 5-10, I think it was. And I thought, oh boy, I wonder what... Now, I knew what they thought they were wanting to get. They wanted to address all the kind of a woke philosophy that was showing up at some of our campuses. But I don't think they were aware that there is kind of a division about educational philosophy amongst some of us Lutherans. But anyway, in some of my wider reading, I found out it was not the first time that the Missouri Synod had asked somebody to produce a Lutheran philosophy of education. A long time ago, there was something called the Board for Parish Education, now defunct, BPE. 1941, beginning of World War II. The Board of Parish Education was given the assignment by the Synod to prepare a treatise on the Lutheran point of view in education. Good. 3 years later, the Board for Parish Education reported to the Synod that while the study of this subject was begun by a committee and members of the staff, no report could yet be made. After all, they only had 3 years. In 1950, 6 years later, the Board for Parish Education reported that some exploratory work had been done. In 1953, 3 years later, the Board for Parish Education reported that it had appointed a committee to give attention to the project. In 1956, the Board for Parish Education reported that it had requested a grant of $10,000 from the Committee on Scholarly Research to shape up the project, and the request was granted. Money solves all these problems. And it's kind of an interesting note. So they asked for $10,000 in 1956. There was a note on, I think in the handbook reports that $10,000 is also the cost projected in 2023 for the production and print electronic pamphlet by the Chief Financial Officer and LCMS Accounting and Financial Services staff. So I don't know, I guess that's not inflation, but it's interesting, the same amount of money. Okay, so years later, 1965 we were at, the Board for Parish Education reported to the Synod, some progress had been made on the various topics to be included in the book, but the project is still far from completion. And then 1972, in the event the board decides to terminate the project, the Committee for Research should be notified that the funds are no longer needed. To have to report an unfinished assignment is a frustrating experience. I regret it very much. The need for a treatise on the Lutheran point of view in education still persists. It would be helpful to a multiple audience, pastors, teachers, and directors of Christian education, students at our seminaries, and teachers in teachers' colleges, writers of curriculum materials, and others who are interested in the theological and philosophical bases of our program of Christian education. My thanks to all who participated in the program. I regret that our efforts did not result in a finished project. So there you have it, Missouri Synod's effort to produce philosophy of Lutheran education. Now, I had contacted the office at CTCR to see if they could give me some kind of an update. And they said it's hardly been 3 years yet. No, it's not ready yet, but hopefully it'll be ready in time for the next convention. On the left, again, I apologize, it's so small, 2001, 24 years ago, CCLE was just getting started. I had written a letter to the Reverend Dr. Patrick Ferry, president of Concordia University, Wisconsin. And he responded, actually, in print. Dear Pastor Brondos, thank you for your letter dated August 27th. I have been eager to reply, but the events associated with the start of a new school year have kept me from my correspondence for a while. I appreciate some of the advanced thinking you have done regarding the possibility of tracks or minors for future teachers interested in classical Lutheran education. It would be my hope that we could work toward such a possibility for students on our campus. To that end, I have had an initial conversation with the Dean of our School of Education, Dr. James Jurgensen. He laid out for me some of the state of Wisconsin's Department of Public Instruction's requirements. However, he indicated that there was nothing that would prevent us from this pursuit as long as we adhered to those requirements. Just as important to me, Dr. Jurgensen expressed his willingness to work on this and move it forward. Given Dr. Ed Veith's presence on our campus and his leadership, I think that says, and I couldn't quite read that, in this effort, I will request by way of copy of this letter that Dr. Veith and Dr. Jurgensen meet for a preliminary discussion on this matter. From there, it will be important to broaden the conversation to include others on our faculty and individuals such as yourself, I am sure. Thank you for your prompting of this dialogue. My hope is that we can accomplish some very tangible work on it very soon. 2001. 25 years later, it's starting to happen. Just have to wait 25 or 30 years in the Missouri Synod things to happen. But once I got to Zion, I really poured myself into studying education in so many different ways. And some of the things I mentioned here, I mentioned this, the Apostle Paul talks, I'm talking like a fool, because I'm not the ultimate authority or expert in anything, but if you give it a chance, contact me. But in 1996, there's a woman in California who attended an LCMS teachers conference. She herself wasn't Lutheran. She rips that thing to shreds. She was no fan of progressive education, and she nails it. And over the course of the years, I tried to share this with a few faculty and people out of Concordia, as it wasn't received very well. There it is. And I was going to tease Wendy and Anna a little bit earlier. It's been great getting to meet some new people, and with Wendy as a program coordinator, I was a high maintenance person to get registered for this conference, so I know my wife could often use some more help in that area. And Anna had something that we never had, that we should have had from the very beginning of CCLE. And by that I mean a British accent. Any organization that esteems the likes of Clive Staples and John Ronald Royal and Gilbert Keith, and in my opinion, even Pelham Granville, ought to have somebody with a British accent. And now we have one. And I always kind of wondered, too, those names like that. So Clive Staples, of course, is C.S. Lewis. And John Ronald Royal Tolkien, I had to look up. I wanted to make sure I got the pronunciation right, because with British names you can't be too sure, right? And take it from me, from practical experience. If you say, "Man, I sure love that music of Ralph Vaughan Williams," or if you think that Evelyn is a female, or if you think that George Eliot is a male, you just don't look real sophisticated. Again, I'm telling you that from practical experience, but I've learned. I'm growing. I'm getting better. So with I didn't know if they would call Clive when he was young, Clive Staples. How did they decide what to call him? They ended up calling him Jack. It was the name of his dead dog. I don't know how that happened exactly, but with Dr. Veith, for 25 years, do we call him Gene? We call him Ed. Which one is it? I'm not sure. And for some people, it's still a mystery after 25 years. For me, I think the solution is simple. We just call him GE. GE, he brings good things to life. So that's the way I would handle it, but I'm sure there are other explanations. But Renaissance, not Reformation, and pursuing the trivium, you really ought to read those. They're about as timely today as they were back then, and you see some things that, some resources that you might still use today. There's one of the schools that he featured, I think, had a curriculum called How the Romans Lived and Spoke. Kind of interesting approach to teaching Latin. Like I said, I went to the week-long Logos Summer Teacher Training where I learned about the 7 laws of teaching. And since there weren't any other classical conferences at the time, the ACCS conferences, and I asked people, if I'm starting a classical school, what should we start with? And they said Saxon math and Shirley grammar. And so when I went to Zion, my wife and I, she was in the lower grades, I was in the upper grades, and I just told the teachers who were very suspicious of somebody who didn't have a teaching certificate and was a pastor, because many teachers, pastor, you stay over at the church, you got things handled here at the school, so, the threshold to their door in their classroom is a line in the sand, cuius regio, eius religio. But it was great that I could help bridge that gap. But when I came there, I said, you teachers don't have to change anything. Don't do anything different. I'm not going to tell you what to do. In the meantime, both Marilyn and I, we used Saxon math, the Shirley grammar method. And by the end of the year, when parents saw that second graders knew how to diagram a sentence and knew all the principal parts of speech, the parents were going, wow, I didn't even learn that in junior high school. And the other teachers were saying, I wonder if maybe we should start doing that. And then they were prepared. They were ready. They wanted to do it. And other occasions, I've had a teacher where I got her started on some fairly simple Latin. And later she came to me and said, Pastor, I want more of that. And if you can get that to happen. But, we would do things with the school, so we would use Latin vocabulary. I put together a daily oral Latin, and the teacher would say, okay, students, line up at the Yanua. And they knew to go to the door. And so many wonderful things like that. And they could, she had them learning Lord's Prayer in Latin, as I'm sure many of you do. But just learning to the whole life. I'm going to wrap things up now. I didn't mean to go this long. Parents reporting to us that their children are seeing the Te Deum in the bathtub, or when they're out at the mall, the child's looking up at the wall and telling their mother, that looks a little bit like a Monet. And so parents are, what's going on now with our kids? So I'm going to wrap things up here to try to pull it together now. And just to suggest some things, there are things that I wish I could have gotten done, never did. I would have liked to have had a drive time podcast, kind of like Issues, Etc., but start it when all the soccer moms are picking up their kids from school. I mean, what mom doesn't want to know more about education for their kids? It could have been a great opportunity, perhaps, to collaborate, to share. So, buying books at a school can be expensive. So what if we had a classroom set of books that we, shared with each other? Just, you're done with this unit, send it on to the next school. And to have, I've got so many files of PDF documents and lesson plans and things. Is there a repository where I could put that so that other people could get it? Is there some way that second grade teachers could meet online? Or is there some way that we could have, I don't know if you do teacher in-services or something, but I'd be happy to help out with that. Sometimes we would, I don't think I ever took any of my teachers to a district Lutheran Teachers Conference. I went by myself one time because I got Teacher of the Year award in the Northern Illinois District, which I don't know, that happens to classical educators too much, but there was a pretty big gasp in the room when they saw somebody with a clerical collar get up to the podium to receive the gift. Anyway, well, I'm sorry. I love talking about all these things, and there's so much. But we don't listen enough. We don't listen to our kids sometimes enough. You need to let your children speak, and I apologize. I want to listen to you. So do you have anything you want to talk about or ask? And you don't have to do it here. Get my card and call me up or call up my wife. Sometimes it's helpful just to have a neutral person, an old guy, to talk to and bounce things off. And you don't have to like my ideas. You can just, sometimes if I give you a bad idea, it might give you your own good idea. So anybody? I know I always hated it when the bell rang and somebody raised their hand, just before lunch. So we'll be around a little bit longer here.
Do I have any questions or comments for Joel? I've got a bunch I've got to ask him about after we dismiss. I didn't know that he learned about this from me. I thought I learned about it from him. So we're all confused. Well, again, Joel, Pastor Brondos, we salute you, we thank you. You are our hero of this organization, and thank you for getting it going. And we'll see you all at 7 o'clock for the award ceremony.